Poor widower collapses after saving pregnant woman. Next day, what happened shocked everyone. Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for fun, facts, and fresh content every week. The sky was gray that morning, heavy with clouds that promised snow. The wind was soft but cold, whispering through the trees like it carried secrets. In a small wooden house at the edge of the hills lived a man named Elijah Moore. He was a quiet man, older than he looked, with shoulders that had once carried dreams but now carried silence. His hands were strong, but his grip had loosened with time. He lived alone ever since his wife, Clara, had passed away 3 winters ago. Her memory lived in the cracks of the wooden walls, in the scent of lavender that still clung to her old scarf, and in the jar of plum jam she had sealed and left untouched. Elijah never opened it, not because he couldn't, but because doing so might mean letting go of what little was left of her. Each day, Elijah followed the same rhythm. He would wake up before sunrise, light the fire, boil black tea with no sugar, and sit near the window watching the snow fall on the empty land outside. The town was 10 miles away, and he hadn't visited it in weeks. His pantry had enough beans, dried corn, and salted meat to last another month. He didn't need anything. Or maybe he had just learned to live without. That morning, while he was stacking wood near the shed, he saw something strange. Footprints. Barefoot, light, and uneven. Not animal tracks, human. And they were fresh. The snow hadn't yet covered them. He followed the trail without thinking, a sense of worry waking up in his chest. His legs moved slower now, but his eyes stayed sharp. The tracks led toward the old ravine, where the wind howled louder and the snow gathered thicker. And then he saw her, curled up in the snow, her arms wrapped around her middle, her body shaking. Her hair was messy and stuck with ice. Her dress was torn, and her hands were turning blue. Elijah rushed forward. He knelt beside her and touched her neck. There was a pulse, weak but present. Her body was cold, and her belly was swollen. She was pregnant, almost ready to give birth. She looked like she had been walking for days, with no food, no rest, and no help. He didn't think twice. He picked her up in his arms. Her weight was light, but it felt like he was carrying a storm. Each step back to the house felt harder. The wind blew snow into his face, his boots slipped, but he didn't stop. Inside the cabin, the fire was almost out. He laid her down on the old cot, wrapped her in every blanket he had, and boiled water. He peeled off her wet clothes with careful hands, not to harm her but to save her. He dressed her in one of Clara's nightgowns. He placed warm cloths on her feet and gave her sips of water. Her breathing was rough, but steadying. She didn't wake up that day. Elijah sat beside her all night, watching the rise and fall of her chest, listening to the wind cry outside like it mourned something. The next morning, she opened her eyes. Her lips were cracked. She looked around in confusion, then down at her stomach. She moved her hand slowly and then relaxed when she felt the baby still inside her. Elijah brought her warm broth and helped her sit up. She drank without speaking, and he didn't ask her anything. There was no need. Sometimes silence said enough. Her name was Harper, she finally told him. She had no one else. She had run away from a man who claimed to love her but hurt her instead. When she learned she was pregnant, the shame was too much. No one believed her. No one stood by her. So she left. Elijah didn't speak. He just listened and kept the fire burning. Harper began to eat better. She moved slowly but steadily. She helped fold the blankets and clean the mugs without being asked. She didn't say much, but she smiled when Elijah gave her an extra pillow or placed a warm stone under her feet at night. It was the kind of kindness she wasn't used to. And Elijah, he began to feel something he thought was long gone. Not love, not yet, but something warm, something soft. Outside, the snow continued, but it felt quieter now, like it didn't want to disturb them. Elijah noticed the change. The land still looked dead, but the air didn't feel so heavy. He hadn't laughed in years, but once when Harper spilled the flour while trying to bake bread, he chuckled. It was a rough sound and used, but it was there. She looked at him and smiled shyly, her eyes surprised but bright. He liked that smile. Harper painted with coal on scraps of paper she found near the fireplace. Elijah had told her once that Clara used to paint too. That made her stop for a moment, but then she continued, as if her drawings could honor the woman who came before. One morning, Harper showed him a sketch. It was the cabin from outside, smoke curling from the chimney, snow on the roof, and 2 figures sitting near the fire. Elijah looked at it for a long time before saying, "It's good." She smiled again. But good things are fragile, and peace is never promised. One afternoon, While Harper was sweeping near the door, there was a knock. A heavy one. Elijah opened the door slowly and saw the sheriff standing there. He was a tall man with sharp eyes and a colder heart. He looked past Elijah and into the room. "Word's gotten around," he said. "Folks are talking. Pregnant girl, missing from town. Said to be involved with someone important." Elijah didn't move, just stood in the doorway, blocking the sheriff's view. "She's not hurting anyone," he said firmly. The sheriff nodded slowly. "Just be careful, Elijah. People have long memories and short tempers." Then he left. When Elijah closed the door, Harper was sitting in the corner, her hands folded tightly. She looked scared, but not for herself. For him. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Elijah shook his head. "You don't need to be." After that, they talked less. Not out of anger, but out of caution. But each morning, when Harper opened her eyes and saw the fire still burning, she knew she wasn't alone. Elijah woke up earlier than usual the next morning. The sky outside had turned a softer shade of gray, and though the snow still covered the ground, something in the air felt different. The wind no longer howled through the cracks in the wood but moved gently like a sigh. Inside, the fire still burned, steady and low. Harper was already awake, sitting near the hearth with her hands resting on her belly. Her face looked tired but calm, the kind of calm that comes after a storm has passed, even if only for a while. Elijah brewed tea and made porridge, adding a few dried berries he had been saving. Harper ate quietly, offering him a soft smile between bites. She moved slower now, her body heavy with the nearing birth, and Elijah watched her with quiet concern, always close enough to help, never saying much, but his presence was steady and strong. She had started humming again, soft tunes that floated through the cabin like light breezes. Sometimes she would pause in the middle of a song, her hand pressed to her belly as the baby moved. Elijah noticed the way her eyes softened in those moments, as if she were speaking to someone only she could hear. He never interrupted. He just listened, not to the words, but to the feeling behind them. As the days passed, their quiet routine became familiar. Harper helped with little things when she could, folding clothes, washing dishes, feeding the fire. Elijah repaired a loose step on the porch and made her a stool so she could sit more comfortably by the window. He didn't say it was for her, but she knew. She began sketching again, using bits of charcoal and leftover paper. One morning, Elijah found a drawing of the wood stove with a pot gently steaming on top. It looked simple, but he recognized the care in every line. It looked like home. They didn't speak about what was growing between them. There were no confessions or big words, but something had changed. The silence between them had shifted. It no longer felt like emptiness, but like understanding. He would pass her a cup of tea, and she would meet his eyes for a moment longer than needed. She would touch his arm in thanks, and he would not move away. These were the quiet signs of trust, of something fragile yet real taking root. One afternoon, Harper stood by the open door, breathing in the cold air. The snow was melting slowly, patches of brown earth peeking through. Elijah stood beside her, silent as usual, but she could feel the warmth from him like the fire inside. He had asked nothing of her, never questioned her past, never judged. In his silence, she had found safety. That evening, while she brushed her hair near the fire, she spoke softly about her life before. Not everything, just enough. How she had trusted the wrong man. How she thought love meant accepting pain. How the town had turned against her when she told the truth. Elijah listened without speaking, his hands moving slowly over a piece of wood he was carving. When she finished, he placed the carving on the table. It was a small bird with wings just beginning to open. She picked it up and held it like it was something precious. That night, she slept better than she had in weeks. But peace never stays untouched. One evening, while Harper was resting, Elijah went outside to chop wood. The wind had picked up again, and the sky threatened more snow. As he split a log, a sudden pain shot through his chest. He dropped the axe, grabbing his side. His breathing grew shallow, and the world spun. He tried to call out, but his voice was weak. His legs gave out, and he fell to his knees in the snow. Inside, Harper felt something was wrong. She stood slowly, holding her back for support, and stepped out onto the porch. When she saw Elijah on the ground, her heart dropped. She called his name and hurried as fast as she could across the snow. She knelt beside him, her own strength fading but her fear stronger. His eyes were half closed, his face pale. She helped him up with all the power she had left and somehow got him inside. He collapsed onto the cot, barely conscious. Harper lit the fire again, boiled water, and pressed wet cloths to his forehead. His body burned with fever, and he mumbled words she couldn't understand. For 3 days, he remained like that, drifting between sleep and pain. Harper stayed by his side, feeding him broth, wiping his brow, whispering words of comfort even when she wasn't sure he could hear. Her own strength was running low. The baby was due any day, and she hadn't rested properly in weeks. But she didn't leave him. Then one night, as the fire burned low and the wind howled outside once again, her labor began. The pain came sudden and strong. She doubled over, clutching her stomach, tears stinging her eyes. Elijah was still unconscious, and she was alone. But she remembered everything he had given her: shelter, care, a place without judgment. That gave her strength. She crawled to the corner of the room where Miriam's old linen chest sat. Inside were clean blankets, cloths, and a tin marked with faded lace. Harper found herbs, some dried roots, and remembered the things Elijah had told her about Clara. She lit another lamp, laid down the blankets, and braced herself. The hours that followed were filled with fire and thunder, pain and breath, fear and power. Alone, she delivered the baby, a boy, red-faced and full of life. His cries filled the cabin, loud and new, pushing out the silence. She held him close, tears falling freely down her cheeks. She named him Noah. The name felt strong, safe, like hope wrapped in something real. After cleaning and wrapping him, she turned to Elijah. He was still, breathing shallowly, his skin cold. Harper crawled to him, placing the baby on her chest and pressing her hand to his. She whispered his name over and over, not letting go. That night she stayed by him, a fire in her chest stronger than anything the world could bring. By morning, his breathing steadied. The fever broke. His eyes opened slowly, and he looked at her, then at the baby in her arms. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Harper smiled through tears, brushing a hand over his face gently. "You came back," her eyes said, and he understood. Outside, the snow had stopped. The air was warmer. The first bird of spring called out from the trees. Inside, Elijah blinked slowly, as if waking from a long dream. Peace had returned, quiet and steady. And this time, it had brought company. The days that followed were slow but filled with change. The snow began to melt in wide patches, and the once frozen ground softened beneath their feet. Water dripped from the eaves, and birds returned to the bare trees, their songs weaving gently into the quiet cabin. Inside, Elijah grew stronger with each sunrise. Though his body still ached and his steps were slow, the fever had left him, and with it, the heavy cloud that had hung over him for years seemed to lift. He spent his days sitting near the window with Noah in his arms while Harper rested, her body still healing but her spirit calm. She moved carefully, always watching over Elijah and the baby, as if afraid something would break again, but the air around them no longer felt fragile. It felt held together by something unspoken but strong. Elijah watched Harper with quiet awe. There was a softness in her now, a peace that had taken root through pain and fire. She sang to Noah in the mornings, simple lullabies and gentle hums, while sunlight spilled through the windows and wrapped around them like a blanket. Elijah would often stop whatever he was doing just to listen. He found joy in the smallest things, the way Harper cradled Noah, the soft rise and fall of their breath as they slept, the faint scent of herbs she used in the stew. The cabin, once filled with silence and sorrow, now carried the gentle rhythm of life. It no longer felt like a place he was waiting to leave. It felt like a place where something had begun. One afternoon, as Elijah carved a new cradle from leftover pine wood, the sound of wheels on gravel reached his ears. He stood slowly, walking to the window with care. Outside, down the long dirt path that led to the cabin, a line of elegant carriages approached. Their dark wood frames and shining brass reflected the sunlight. Horses trotted steadily, their hooves clicking against the thawing earth. Harper stepped onto the porch, Noah in her arms, her eyes wide with recognition and surprise. Elijah joined her, standing beside her without speaking. The carriages stopped just before the porch, and from the first one stepped a woman in a long coat, her silver hair pulled back neatly, her face lined with worry and kindness. It was Harper's aunt, the only one who had shown her love in the past. The woman reached out, tears in her eyes as she took in the sight of Harper and the baby. The next few hours passed in a blur of movement. Men in clean coats carried crates of supplies, linen, fruit, jars of preserves, even a small crib carved with doves. They placed them gently by the cabin, never crossing the threshold without Harper's nod. Inside, the space filled with new warmth, the scent of fresh fruit mixing with the wood smoke and the quiet joy of reunion. Harper and her aunt spoke in soft tones, their conversation low but filled with emotion. There were tears, then smiles, then long moments of silence where nothing needed to be said. Elijah stayed inside, watching from his chair, feeling both present and apart. When Harper returned, she sat beside him, her expression unreadable but calm. She told him her aunt wanted her to leave with them, to move into a large home where she and Noah would be cared for. Her aunt had means, connections, and a safe place far from judgment. Elijah listened, his chest tight but his face steady. The carriages remained outside that night, their lanterns glowing softly beneath the trees. Harper did not leave. She stayed by Elijah's side, Noah asleep in her arms. The three of them sat close by the fire, their knees nearly touching, wrapped in quiet togetherness. The fire crackled gently, casting golden light on the walls, and outside, the breeze carried the scent of pine and wet earth. Harper spoke softly about the offer, about the choice. She could leave and start over in comfort, or stay and build something new from what they had. Elijah said little, but his silence was not empty. It was full of care, full of the kind of trust that doesn't push or beg. Harper understood. The next morning, the sun rose brighter than it had in months. Birdsong filled the air, and the trees swayed gently. The carriages were still there, waiting. Harper stood on the porch with Noah and watched the sunlight dance across the grass. Her aunt joined her, and after a quiet talk and a long embrace, the woman returned to her carriage. The drivers packed nothing. The crates remained. No one left the house. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Elijah placed the new cradle near the hearth. Harper laid Noah inside, her hand resting for a moment on the wooden edge. Elijah stood behind her, his hand resting gently on her back. The room was warm, not just from the fire, but from something deeper. Peace was no longer a visitor. It had made a home with them. Over the weeks that followed, the cabin settled into a new rhythm. Elijah's strength returned fully. He spent his mornings tending the small patch of land behind the house, preparing for planting season. Harper cooked and painted again, her sketches now filled with light and softness. Noah grew stronger by the day, his tiny hands grasping, his laughter bright. They shared their days without rush, without fear. Their connection deepened, not with big moments but with shared glances, soft touches, and the comfort of knowing they didn't have to carry their pain alone anymore. Harper often said little things like thank you, or I'm here not with words, but with actions, folded clothes, warm meals, careful sketches left where Elijah would find them. One evening, Harper brought him a drawing of the three of them near the fire. She had captured the way Elijah's eyes softened when he looked at Noah, and the way her own hand reached for his. Elijah looked at it for a long time, then placed it above the mantel, right next to his small framed photo of Clara. The past hadn't disappeared. It hadn't been replaced. But something new had grown beside it, something quiet and alive. When Harper saw it there, she didn't speak. She just smiled, then turned to stoke the fire. Spring came fully at last. The land around them turned green again, the creek ran fast and clear, and wildflowers bloomed across the hills. The pain, the loss, the fear, they didn't vanish. But they became part of the story, not the end of it. Elijah no longer sat alone by the window. Harper no longer walked with fear in her steps. Noah's cries were loud and healthy, his laughter bright. The cabin, once filled with silence and sorrow, now carried the sound of life. What happened that winter had changed everything. A poor widower, broken by loss, had found a reason to stand again. A pregnant woman, lost in the snow, had found a home where she was safe. And together, without promises or plans, they had built something strong. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And it all began on a cold day with a quiet act of saving, an act that ended not in tragedy, but in the quiet shock of love taking root when no one expected it.